Hi, everybody. Welcome to Chapter 5, which is all about the news. So, first, Harold Laswell determined that the roles of media should be surveillance, correlation, and transmission, and nothing more. So, basically, what he was saying was that the job of media is to show what's happening in a community, relate it to the people watching, and then transmit that information. So, what is news? News is not a new concept. It's something that's been around for ages. Early news sources can be found in Turkey and China. Um, News changed over time. It started out as the government informing people of what the government was doing. Then it transitioned to being individuals writing stories that were critiquing the government. So it was either pro government, released by the government, or it was anti government, released by the people. With the changing in the growth of countries and the shift in people, that also changed to how news was crafted. Because you couldn't just write about what was happening in your area. If you wanted the information to be broadly understood, it had to be written in such a way that someone in Fargo, North Dakota could receive similar news to someone in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and it's still understandable. It's not just about your local government. News is supposed to be objective, which means there's no opinion, no subjective statement. It's here's the facts of the story. That's it. Most news is written in an inverted pyramid, specifically newspaper stories, which means the most important information is at the top of the story and then it funnels down. So at the top, it would be information that must have to successfully communicate to your reader. Then it funnels to additional information that's helpful but not critical. And then in the end, it's stuff that's nice to have, but if space needs to be made available for another story by the editor, they know easily where to cut. And so the information is still understood. And it's crucial that the most important information is at the beginning of the story because your reader can stop reading at any time. So if they stop reading 2 graphs in, and you've got the most important information in those first 2 paragraphs, you're good. They've got the story and what they need. So timeliness, or there's 5 concepts that are most generally used to determine whether or not a story is newsworthy. And first is timeliness, and it has to do with what's going on at the time. So it could be a special sports event, or right now is presidential elections. So there's you're being inundated with primaries and caucuses. That's timeliness. Then you have prominence, and it can be a prominent sports figure, or it can be someone that's brought into prominence because of news stories. Some of the pictures that are in the slide are, if you all remember the controversy with Kim Davis, the county clerk, who was refusing to present or provide marriage licenses to same-sex couples, even though the Supreme Court had ruled for marriage equality. That put her in prominence. She's a normal everyday person, but because of her refusal to do her job, that put her into prominence and made her more popular, so to speak. Prominence right now could also be Leonardo DiCaprio, because he just won his first Academy Award. So he's someone that's in the spotlight, but he's given further prominence by the award. Then you have proximity, and that is that stories that are closer to you are more important. You don't necessarily care if they're running an art fair in Central Park in New York as much as you're going to care about an art and craft fair happening here in Fargo. Because what's happening closer to home is what matters most. Then there's consequence, which can be criminal It can be criminal consequences. It could be acts of war. It could be just anything that has great consequence to it. So a lot of you saw a lot of news over the last couple of weeks has been inundated with the police officer here in Fargo that was shot. So that was prominence, but it's also consequence because there was a death. So that's why that story was so prevalent. And it was prevalent on a lot of different levels. And then you have human interest stories, and these are the feel-good stories. They're stories that make you feel good as a person, but also give you hope for humanity. I have a video clip that you can watch that is a school that awarded Homecoming Queen to one of their students with Down syndrome. You can find these stories all over the news. One of my favorites, if you want to Google it, is there was a young boy that liked to wear a tie to class every day, and he was teased for it. And some older boys, he was a water boy for their football team, and they didn't like that he was being teased anymore, so they all came to class for a day wearing ties to show solidarity for this younger student and as a statement for anti-bullying. It's a pretty cool story if you want to check it out. In 2006, I had the honor of seeing Anderson Cooper speak at University at Buffalo, and he talked a lot about how news is selected and why. But one of the things that he said that has stuck with me for all these years is that you get the news you deserve. So if you spend all of your time watching stories about a missing blonde girl, you won't learn about things happening elsewhere. And what that means is the gatekeepers who decide what news is shown, sometimes it has to do with what people are reacting to. So at the time in 2006, Natalee Holloway had gone missing in the Bahamas, and that's what we were inundated with on cable. Even though there was genocide happening in countries in Africa, and there was drought and famine and all these horrible things happening in other places in the world, but because we were so focused on finding this girl, we weren't learning about what was happening elsewhere. And that's because, excuse me, what is prominent is what gets aired and what people are paying attention to. We can understand the role and regulation of media if we better understand the three types. So there's broadcast, narrowcast, and tailored. One of the broadcast is the most regulated by the FCC. These are your local channels. There are things that you can get on your TV with an antenna. You don't have to pay to have access to them. So that's generally your NBC, CBS, ABC, Fox, CW, and then there's some more channels that are growing in that field, but generally speaking, it's Fox, NBC, ABC, CBS. They are the most regulated by the FCC in terms of content. So there are certain words that you can't say. There's certain images you can't show. There's specific content that you just can't include because it's the public airwaves. It has to be appropriate for the public. Then you have narrowcast. These tend to be more cable-driven shows. And anything that's a cable channel like TBS, USA, Spike, Food Network, they have a more narrow audience and they aren't as regulated by the FCC because you have to pay to get the information. Doesn't mean they're free to do whatever they choose. They're just regulated less. And it's more narrow because they're targeting a specific audience. So in the case of Food Network, they're targeting people that like to cook or like to eat. Spike TV is geared towards men. ESPN is geared towards sports fans, which tend to be more males. Then you have tailored, which is even more narrowly focused. Who is the media today? Well, we all are in a lot of ways. We have this term called citizen journalists, and they're people that see what's happening in the world around them and they report it. So think of times that you may have seen something happen and you posted it on Facebook or you tweeted about it. That makes you a citizen journalist. Some people compare citizen journalism to amateur journalists. But you really want to consider Mayer's 3 E's, which is ethics, economics, and epistemology, when you're considering these people to be true journalists. Do they follow the professional ethics set by journalism? Are they being objective? Economically, who's behind them? Some blogs that are done by citizen journalists might be writers for another company, and it's just their way of putting their opinions out. And when you're paid to put out your opinion, are you being a journalist? And again, being opinionated goes against the objectivity clause. And then the epistemology, what is their worldview? What are they trying to accomplish? You want to make sure that you understand agenda setting theory, which is that the press may not be successful much of the time in telling people what to think, but it is stunningly successful in telling its readers what to think about. So basically, what happens is the media puts out a story, and that's their agenda. That then becomes a part of the public agenda. And it can, at times, change policy. But they're not telling you this is what you should think. They're saying this is what's important. This is what these gatekeepers think is important. It can then become a part of the public agenda. And then it can go to the government level and change policy. Exemplification theory, in essence, is using examples to tell a story. So think of the video that accompanies a story as opposed to the news writer just reading the story and maybe there's a still photo on the side. And there are examples of each of those theories in the lecture slides. Also, there's framing theory, which talks about how we select some aspects of a story over another. And frames guide our interpretations. So think about the way a story is told. I put an example of 2 tweets that were sent out about the same exact story. One was from the Washington Post, one was from Wall Street Journal. The Washington Post tweet says, Arizona governor vetoes controversial anti-gay bill. The second one talks about Arizona governor vetoes religious freedom bill. They're talking about the exact same piece of legislature, but they're presenting it in a different way. They've chosen to focus the frame of the story in a different way. Another example of this would be the Affordable Care Act versus Obamacare. They're the exact same thing, but depending on what channel you watch will determine what label they use or what political party is talking about that topic. A more recent example would be last fall with the Kim Davis controversy. There were headlines that she was changing parties. She was a Democrat, but she switched to Republican because she no longer agreed. Where CNN said that she's no longer a or that she registered as a Democrat, and Fox said that she was admonishing the Democratic Party or something along those lines. They're telling the same story. They're just telling it in slightly different ways, and that's framing. And that's the most important information you need to know for Chapter 5. I hope you have a great week, and I'll see you soon.